The dust hadn't even settled when Clara felt the stranger's hand beneath her elbow, lifting her from the dirt like she weighed nothing at all. Her husband, Frank, stood frozen on the porch steps, his face twisted with the kind of rage that usually ended in split lips and bruised ribs. But this time something was different. This time there was a witness. "Not yours anymore," the stranger said, his voice carrying the weight of a funeral bell across the yard. Clara's breath caught. She'd never seen this man before, tall as a pine, weathered leather chaps, a hat pulled low enough to shadow everything but the hard line of his jaw. His horse stood patient behind him, a magnificent black stallion that seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. Frank's mouth worked like a fish gasping for air, but no words came. "You don't know what you're stepping into, mister," Frank finally managed, his voice cracking like a boy's. "That's my wife," was the stranger corrected, never taking his eyes off Frank. Past tense. Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it. For 3 years she'd lived in this god-forsaken homestead 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, enduring Frank's fists and his whiskey breath, and his promises that tomorrow would be different. The bruises on her ribs still ached from last week's conversation about the burnt biscuits. The stranger's hand remained steady on her arm, not possessive like Frank's touch, but protective, grounding. Like an anchor in a storm she'd been drowning in for so long she'd forgotten what dry land felt like. "Clara," Frank said, and she could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. "Get in the house. We'll talk about this inside." She knew what talk meant. The same thing it always meant. But when she looked up at the stranger's face, really looked, she saw something that made her knees weak. Kindness. Not pity, not lust, not the calculating look of a man sizing up another man's property, just simple, honest kindness. "I asked you a question, mister." Frank's voice rose an octave. "What's your business here?" The stranger tipped his hat back just enough to show steel-gray eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. "Heard screaming from the road. Came to see if someone needed help." Clara's face burned. The whole county would know by sundown. Nobody screamed. Frank lied, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. "You heard wrong." The stranger's gaze flicked to Clara's torn dress, the dirt ground into her knees, the way she held her left arm against her ribs like something inside was broken. "Did I?" Clara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She could lie. She could protect Frank the way she always had, make excuses for the bruises, blame herself for provoking him. It would be easier, safer, the devil you know and all that. But then she remembered the sound her own scream had made echoing across the empty plains, wild and desperate, like an animal caught in a trap. She remembered thinking that maybe someone would hear, maybe someone would care enough to come. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, you didn't hear wrong." Frank's face went white, then red, then something closer to purple. "Clara, you shut your mouth right now, or I swear to God." "Or what?" The stranger stepped forward, and Clara felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. "You'll hit her again." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could smell the leather and horse sweat, and something else, hope, maybe, or just the absence of fear for the first time in years. "Look, friend." Frank tried a different approach, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "This is between me and my wife. Domestic matters, nothing that concerns outsiders. Everything concerns me now." The stranger's voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. "Clara, you got somewhere to go, family, friends." She almost laughed. Frank had made sure to isolate her from everyone who might have helped. Her sister in Denver might as well have been on the moon. "No, nobody." "That's not entirely true." The stranger reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "You're Clara May Whitmore, born in St. Louis, daughter of Thomas Whitmore." Clara's breath caught. Nobody had called her by her maiden name in 3 years. "How do you?" "Your sister Catherine sent me. Been looking for you for 6 months." The world tilted sideways. Catherine, Sweet Catherine, with her gentle hands and her terrible cooking, and her letters that Frank had burned in the fireplace, claiming they were bills. All this time she'd thought her sister had forgotten her. Frank's hand was definitely on his knife now. She's not going anywhere with you. But Clara was already stepping away from him, toward the stranger, toward the possibility of a life that didn't involve flinching every time a door opened. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the tension like a blade. Clara's heart sank as she recognized the rhythm. 3 horses, moving fast, raising dust clouds that meant business. Frank's friends from town, most likely. The kind of men who thought a woman's place was wherever her husband said it was, and any stranger who disagreed was asking for trouble. Looks like company, Frank said, and the relief in his voice made Clara's stomach turn. Now you'll see how we handle things out here. The stranger didn't even glance toward the approaching riders. His attention remained fixed on Frank, reading him like a book he'd memorized. Clara realized with a chill that this wasn't his first showdown. The way he stood, the way his hand rested easy near his gun, this was a man who knew violence intimately, and wasn't afraid of it. Last chance, the stranger said quietly. Let her go peaceful, and I'll ride out. No harm done. Frank's laugh was ugly. You hear that, Clara? Your knight in shining armor thinks he can waltz onto my property and steal my wife. What do you think Sheriff Coleman's gonna say about that? Clara's blood turned to ice water. Sheriff Coleman was Frank's drinking buddy, his poker partner, his alibi whenever questions got asked about why Clara always seemed to be falling down the stairs or walking into doors. If Coleman was riding with the approaching men, the riders crested the hill, 3 of them, just as she'd counted. Sheriff Coleman in the lead, his badge catching the afternoon sun like a warning. Behind him rode the Morrison brothers, Tom and Jake, both mean as rattlesnakes and twice as venomous when they'd been drinking. Well, well, Coleman called out as they reined in their horses. What do we have here? Frank, you having some trouble with this stranger? He's trying to steal my wife, Sheriff. Came onto my land, threatened me, tried to take Clara by force. The lies came so easily, Clara almost believed them herself. She'd heard Frank's version of reality for so long, sometimes she forgot there was another truth underneath. That's so. Coleman's hand dropped to his gun. Stranger, you got anything to say for yourself? The stranger's voice remained steady as bedrock. I've got plenty to say. Question is whether you're interested in hearing the truth, or just backing your friend's story. Tom Morrison spat into the dust. Sounds like you're calling us liars, mister. Clara could feel the noose tightening around all of them. In 30 seconds this would turn into a gunfight, and the stranger, for all his confidence, was outnumbered 4-1. She thought about Catherine, waiting somewhere for news that would never come. She thought about the life she might have had, the person she used to be before Frank taught her to make herself small. She thought about screaming. Wait, Clara said, and something in her voice made everyone freeze. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the one thing Frank had never found, never thought to look for, a small silver locket that had belonged to her mother. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing a tiny photograph of herself and Catherine as children, arms wrapped around each other, laughing at something the camera couldn't capture. The stranger's eyes softened when he saw it. Catherine has one just like it, he said quietly. She showed it to me when she hired me to find you, said you two made a pact to never lose them, no matter what. Clara's throat closed up. She remembered that day. They were 8 and 10, standing in the photography studio in St. Louis, their mother fussing over their dresses. Catherine had whispered that the lockets would keep them connected forever, even if they were apart. Clara had believed her then, with the fierce faith of a child. She never forgot you, the stranger continued, his voice gentle now, meant only for her. Never stopped looking, said she knew you wouldn't just disappear without a word, no matter what anyone told her. Frank made a sound like a wounded animal. Clara, don't listen to him, he's lying. Your sister doesn't care about you. If she did, where's she been all this time? But Clara was remembering Catherine's last letter, the one Frank had burned. How she'd begged Clara to come for a visit, said she was worried, said something in Clara's letters didn't sound right. How Frank had claimed Catherine was trying to interfere, trying to break up their marriage out of jealousy. Sheriff Coleman shifted in his saddle, suddenly uncomfortable. Now hold on, Frank. If this man's a bounty hunter hired by family, I'm not a bounty hunter, the stranger said. Name's Daniel Hayes. I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Mrs. Whitmore, excuse me, Mrs. Patterson, has family who've been worried sick about her. All I'm trying to do is deliver a message. He reached slowly into his other pocket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age and travel. Clara's name was written on it in Catherine's careful script. She wanted you to have this, said if I found you, and you were happy, I should just give you the letter and leave. But if you needed help, he glanced meaningfully at her torn dress, her bruised face. Well, she said to tell you the offer still stands. Clara's hands trembled as she took the letter. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. Catherine had always promised that if Clara ever needed a place to go, a way out, she'd find it. Even when they were children playing house, Catherine had been the one who stood up to bullies, who made sure Clara got her fair share. The envelope felt like hope made tangible. This is ridiculous, Frank snarled, but Clara could hear the desperation underneath. Clara, you're not seriously considering. I am. The words came out stronger than she'd expected. I'm considering everything. She tore open the envelope with fingers that had stopped shaking. Catherine's handwriting blurred through her tears, but the message was clear. Train ticket to Denver, enough money for a fresh start, an address where she'd be welcome for as long as she needed, and at the bottom in Catherine's familiar scrawl, the door is always open, and you are always loved. Daniel Hayes stepped closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I've got a wagon waiting at the crossroads. Your sister's got a house in Denver, steady work lined up if you want it. No questions asked, no conditions, just family taking care of family. Clara looked around at the faces surrounding her. Frank's twisted with rage and panic, Coleman's calculating and uncomfortable, the Morrison brothers watching like vultures waiting for carrion. Then she looked at Daniel Hayes, this stranger who'd ridden miles out of his way because someone loved her enough to send him. Frank, she said, turning to face her husband, I'm leaving, like hell you are. His hand went to his knife again, but Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. Frank, maybe you ought to let the lady make her own choice. This is getting complicated, and I don't want any trouble with the Pinkertons. For a moment Clara thought Frank might lunge at her anyway. His face was purple with rage, his whole body coiled like a spring, but then his shoulders sagged, and she saw what he really was underneath all the bluster. A small mean man who'd built his whole world around having someone smaller to control. You'll be back, he said, his voice ugly. You got nowhere else to go. You'll come crawling back inside a month, begging me to take you in. Clara folded Catherine's letter carefully and tucked it into her bodice, right next to her heart. No, Frank, I won't. Daniel offered her his arm, and she took it without hesitation. They walked together toward his horse, Clara's head held high for the first time in years. Behind them, she could hear Frank shouting, but his words seemed to come from very far away, like echoes from a life she was already leaving behind. The black stallion stood patient as Daniel helped her up behind him. As they rode toward the crossroads, toward the wagon that would take her to Denver, toward Catherine, and a future she couldn't yet imagine, Clara allowed herself one look back. The homestead looked smaller from a distance, less threatening, just a shabby house on a patch of dusty ground, where a woman had forgotten how to dream. Years later, when she was Mrs. Clara Hayes, Daniel had courted her proper, with Catherine's blessing and her own eager heart. She would remember this moment as the day she learned the difference between surviving and living, the day a stranger rode into her life and reminded her that she had always been worth saving. The last thing she saw before they crested the hill was Frank, still standing in the yard, getting smaller and smaller until he disappeared entirely into the dust.